Hi everyone. So welcome to this webinar, which we're going to try and separate some of the fact from fiction that we've been seeing. We'll give everyone another sort of 30 seconds to a minute or so to join, as there's still people clicking up now. What we're going to try and run through in this webinar is there's a lot of reports out at the moment on the property market, what the property market's going to do, what the rental market's going to do. Obviously, a lot of people are either looking to buy or have purchased, so they'd like to know what's going on with their properties and the property prices and what the plans are. One thing, before we go into it, one thing that we always say to people is, if you hold property long enough, which we always advise that you do, we always advise it's a longer term investment vehicle. It's not something that is a quick flip. More often than not, obviously you can do that, but more often it's a longer term project. If you are holding things long term, inevitably you will go through a dip. There's going to be a dip in property. If you're holding 10-15 years, you're going to experience some form of dip or some form of slowdown, and then things start to pick up again. So the only time that really a property dip ever actually matters or is relevant is if you're coming up to the stage where you are about to sell your investment property. If you're a residential owner and people are concerned about the residential prices, well, the reality is that doesn't matter too much, because typically, especially those who are upsizing, if your house falls by, let's go round figures, 10%, then the house you're buying will fall 10% on average. So if you're upscaling it, it doesn't matter so much. But typically an investor, where investors fall short, is they pull the trigger too early and they don't actually need to sell, and they decide to sell during the dip. So a lot of people, there was a mass exodus in the market in sort of 2008, 2009, and then people sort of banked their money, sold at a 15, 20, 25% loss. And actually what happened is they then just sat on the money in a bank, which was doing nothing anyway. They should have just kept it there and waited. But what we want to do today is there's a lot of news articles, stories. So we want to run through today a couple of articles from literally from the last 20 years, from the last 2 decades. And you'll see a lot of similarities in terms of what's going now. And also, it's easy in hindsight. And don't get me wrong, we've handpicked these particular articles. But the idea of it is to demonstrate actually how a lot of the claims are nonsense. There will be certain claims that are correct, but a lot of them are based on just opinions, which more often than not don't come true. So let's have a look at sort of a few of them now. So the first one here is, we've got on the left-hand side, you've got house prices sure to plunge. Economists yesterday held out the spectre of a collapse in house prices as the cost of property soars out of reach. Now, on the right-hand side, we've done a little explanation on this. This was taken from the Daily Mail in 2001. Over the next 6 years, the property prices went up over 100%. So this headline, and there were a number of other headlines, it wasn't just the Daily Mail, but there's a number of headlines saying economists were saying that house prices are sure to plunge, and they didn't. As I say, over the next 6 years, they went up over 100%. Therefore, if you had £200,000 invested in a property, or in properties at that time, property prices were a lot cheaper, over the next 6 years, it would have been worth 520,000, because what you'd have had is you'd have had your increase in the growth plus your income coming in. Now, there's very few places between the time of 2001 and 2007 where you could have got that particular return. Okay, the stock market would have been one of those potentially, but if you've left that in a savings rate, so if people are reading that particular article at the time, getting nervous, selling out of their buy-to-let property and just leaving it in a savings account, they would have trickled along at, give or take, maybe 4% a year at the time. But after 2008, it was dipping down to sort of like 1%, 0.5%. So again, that was an article that was written in 2001, which was just totally incorrect. Again, it's to the bottom right hand side, so house prices to fall 30%. Now, we've all seen that before. You could take that from now. That could be an article that's published now. That could be an article that's published during Brexit. But it wasn't. This was an actual article that was published in 2002. So back in 2002, we've got this particular company, and he was this guy, Roger Bootle, was formerly a chief economist at HSBC, and he said the message is clear: house prices are now so overvalued that a prolonged period of falling prices is on the cards. Now, again, it just didn't happen. Published in 2002, and over the next 5 years, we're looking at growth of around 90 to 95%. So what we're saying to people is, look, again, do we feel that there's going to be a dip? Again, we're going to come to our prediction at the end, but in terms of the scaremongering, house prices to plunge, house prices to fall 30%, very rarely do those things, take hold. And we're not talking about random people, giving their opinion. You're talking about a managing director of capital economics, chief economist at HSBC, one of the Bank of England. It's just, for me, it's crazy that someone with this level of qualification can make a prediction that is so far wrong. But again, if you took that actual headline there, you would actually fit it in now. If that was published today, that report, and you change the dates, you could probably comfortably fit that into the newspapers today. Now, then we come on to this guy. Now, this amused me, Andrew Oswald. And I actually looked some of these people up again because I was quite intrigued, actually, were they sacked after these particular publications. And ironically, they weren't. A lot of them are still in the same jobs. So this guy was a professor of economics. He stated in a paper that he published, and he said, I've told everyone, including my wife, that we have to sell our home. And I would advise everyone in 2002 to sell their home and head into rented accommodation, because his idea is if the property prices are going to plunge as much as he thought he would essentially sell his property, rent for 12 months, 2 years, whatever it may be, and buy a property or the equivalent back at a much cheaper price. So he decided to do that. And the average house price at the time was £95,356. That was a national average. So anyone that listened to him would have never seen that price again. So he predicted that in 2002. Even in the 2008 and 2009 crash, which was one of the biggest property crashes that we had, the average price only dipped to 149,000. So anyone that was buying back then, or selling, I should say, in 2002, and then buying back in 2006, 7, 8, or whatever it may be, even if we bought in that dip, they would have lost a number of years' rent, and they would have paid an extra 60% on their property. So that guy couldn't have been more wrong. Then we head a few more years down the line. So this is 2007. Reuters, again, another big, big establishment. A guy called Simon Rubichon, who was at the time the chief economist at Reuters, he said that he expected prices to be pretty flat over the next 15 months. Now, he said there's only a 10% chance of seeing a 1990s dip. And his colleague went one further and said the chances of a fall in the property prices were pretty small, as there are no obvious triggers. Now, we all know what happened after 2007. The property market crashed, and it had its biggest crash we'd seen in 20 years, and it fell by 16%. A lot of people read these reports of 30% dips, 40% dips. It just doesn't happen. So as I say, the property market had its biggest crash in 2008-9, fell by 16%. And of course, this is after you've got Reuters publishing articles such as this, and there are no triggers. In fact, there are plenty of triggers. The subprime, the cheap mortgages, and the lack of regulation regarding mortgage, and the fact that interest rates were increasing, that was a big trigger. And again, he stated that there were no obvious triggers there. So in terms of the facts that we've seen recently, I'll go back 16 months to 24 months. The Bank of England stated that if we exited the EU, the property market would crash by 30% if we voted for Brexit. So that's back in 2016. Twice they've published this, and again, it's not happened. We see negative reports and positive reports, but daily. More so at the moment, a lot of negative reports. So day in, day out, we've got reports over the last 20 years of the property prices crashing. And again, we could go back any year, and you guys can do this at home. You can do a basic search on Google. You can get a time frame up. You can say, right, how much were people predicting the property prices were crashing in 2001, 2002, 2003? Now, we know that all of those years increased. So if you look at those particular years, you'll just see there's huge amounts, hundreds of reports published every single day on, or every single year, I should say, on how many people are going to lose their money because property prices are crashing. But we only saw that dip in 2008, 2009, and we saw it quickly recover. The Bank of England, which stated that it would crash by 30%, if we voted for Brexit, have again recently said the same thing. Property prices are set to crash 30%. But again, the reason why they do this is a lot of the time that they say it's predicted to fall 30% unless we do something about it. And of course, property prices don't crash by 30%, and the Bank of England say, well, it was down to the market regulations that they put in, which we know is actually not the case. So as we head over to what the ONS have just released. So the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, have just released that the UK average house price increased by 2.1% over the year to March, up from 2% in February. Now, at the time of writing, this was the latest stats we could get from the ONS. We have now seen a stat come out this week that was there was a 1.7% fall nationally year on year. But at the time of writing, we saw average house prices increase over the year in England to 248,000, 2.2%. Wales was up, Scotland was up, Northern Ireland was up. London average house prices increased by 4.7% over the year to March. Now, we obviously know this was before everything really took hold, so the lockdown took hold. We've now seen a huge change. We've now seen people couldn't get in and do valuations. So if they can't get in and do valuations, then of course they're going to struggle full stop to sell their property. They can't even value the property, therefore the estate agent can't get it on the market. And then on top of that, if you can't get clients to go and actually do viewings, then again we're going to see a static market. Now, static market doesn't mean that house prices go down. A static market doesn't mean house prices go up. It means nothing gets sold. So we've already had that now. After lockdown, we've seen that right the way through. And as I say, about 2.5 to 3 weeks ago, the government announced that estate agents can open again. There's certain meticulous things that we have to do on viewings and valuations, whether it's gloves, people aren't allowed to open windows. We have to keep all doors open, all doors wedged open, all lights have to be switched on, just so people aren't touching anything. But again, that should get the market back up and running. Will it be as quick as it was before? No, because you're still going to have people reluctant to invite people into their house for valuations, and probably more so reluctant to invite people into their house for viewings. So I still expect a static market or a slowdown in the market in regards to the number of properties sold. So over the next 6 months, I do expect, in terms of numbers sold, a big slowdown, probably in the region of 30 to 35% slowdown in regards to the number of transactions taking place. But as I say, the number of transactions taking place doesn't mean that there's going to be a dip in prices, and it doesn't mean there's going to be an increase in prices. We have to look a bit deeper into that. So as we then start to think about what the prices are going to do, let's have a look at what some of the other agents and some of the economists are saying. So the majority are ranging from flat to falls. So they're all going with flat to falls. No one has said it's going to increase. They've all said flat to falls. Knight Frank, 3%. Zoopla have come out and just said it's impossible to say, which is not much help, but they've come out and said it's impossible to say. Savills said 5% nationally, they expect it to fall. Lloyds have said 2.2% this year before a bounce back next year. And Bank of England has said possibly 30%. Now, the last one, the Bank of England, is ridiculous. Forget about a 30% dips in prices, because it's, in my opinion, it's actually irresponsible of them to say so, because if you put out statements like this for a reason, because as I say, when it doesn't happen, they say it was their policy that saved it. But the reality is they shouldn't be saying things are going to fall by 30%, because there's no valid reason why things would fall by 30%. The majority of people, and only you guys who are listening to this can answer, is the majority of people that I have spoke to have said, in terms of liquid funds, they've got more in their pocket at the end of every month now than they did have previously. And that's for a number of reasons. Now, that's not everyone, of course, but a lot of people are saying, well, actually, if they've gone on a mortgage holiday, they're saving that money. If they're not traveling and they're not commuting into a certain city centre, wherever they may be, they're saving that. They're going out less. They're spending less going out for food, restaurants, shops, takeaways, whatever it may be. So the majority of people, and I'll be interested to see what your guys' position on it is. If people have you guys have more money or less money, but the majority of people that I spoke to have said actually liquid funds in their pocket, they're actually seeing a bit of an increase. So again, I don't think that the picture is going to be as bad as certainly like the Bank of England are predicting. Now, in terms of what their predictions are after things start to ease back up, Knight Frank have said a 6% increase in 2021. Savills have said 15% over the next few years. Nationwide have come out and said we expect a sharp recovery after lockdown. RICS have said prices to rebound to the previous levels after 9 months. So the majority of people, there are others who have said that it might take a little bit longer, but the majority have said that they all expect a swift recovery. So what do you do? So this is the $1 million question. What do you do if you own a property? So let's talk about you guys who own a property. We're going to come to our predictions next as well. If you own a property, the reality is unless you need to sell that property, then you don't sell it. Doesn't matter. Let's say the worst case happened. Let's say the Bank of England were correct. Let's say it fell. It's still irrelevant because as long as you don't need to sell it, it genuinely doesn't matter. You just keep hold of that property. The chances of it falling by that particular percentage is pretty much slim to none. So you just keep hold of that particular property and then wait for the market to bounce back, because the majority of people are predicting pretty much instantaneous bounce backs. So if you hold the property and you don't need to sell it, you just keep getting the income like you would anyway. Nothing's changed. Even if the property price rocketed up by 50%, again, nothing's changed in your pocket. You're still getting the same income. When you come to sell, that's when you can judge how good the property's been in terms of your growth side. But if you don't need to sell, you simply don't. For those of you who are looking to buy, now this comes on to our prediction. So in terms of our prediction, there are two types of predictions that we make. First of all is a national prediction, because what is the market going to do nationally? And then we have to look at specific areas where we look. So for example, we haven't been touching London for a good 2 to 3 years because we felt London was going to fall. But we still recommended certain pockets, whether that be Liverpool, Leeds, Sheffield, Manchester, those kind of areas. So what do I think nationally, first of all? Well, nationally, we do expect a dip. The reason being is because if we take what the property market does nationally, we know that the people that will suffer from this will be typically the people who are on the lower earnings scale. So a couple of things will happen. They will either have to stay at home for longer. They potentially, if these people are living in a house share, they potentially have to leave that particular house share. And again, the majority of these are outside of the city centres. If people don't have much money to rent, again, they will head outside. So in the suburbs, they will head outside where you can get more bang for your buck for renting. So for example, if you let's take Manchester, for example, a 2-bed in Manchester will probably go, let's say on average for 1,100, give or take, for a 2-bed in Manchester. If you go into the outskirts of Manchester, sort of 25-minute drive, where someone who would live there will be a lower earner, so to speak, then you're probably looking at two-bed terrace. You could probably pick up for maybe sort of 500, 450, 500. So it's a big difference, but it will be that particular clientele that would suffer. So what will happen to those properties? I do think those property prices will come off in terms of the percentage. So we're saying on average around about a 3.5% fall over the next 6 months nationally. So nationally. But in terms of the actual city centres, we just don't see that happening. We feel that what will actually boost the prices or hold the prices only at 3.5%, because I feel that the suburbs will fall a bit more than that. But what will hold it to only 3.5% nationally will be city centres, because the more people fear the market, the less they act. And when people don't act, it puts more pressure on rental properties. We've already seen there was a BBC news article published this week that said rental is spiraling out of control. Demand for rental is spiraling out of control. Lockdown has caused a number of things. Lockdown has caused a glut of properties that are available to rent due to a number of reasons. One, they're saying that actually divorces means that there's more demand on properties to rent. They're saying people have realised that they need to get out from mum and dad, therefore they need to go and rent. There's other demands, for example, the people that are in the rented accommodation aren't ready to move on yet. So again, it's not freeing up those particular properties, which is therefore creating a big difference between supply and demand. So we've already seen that demand has increased. Now we know firsthand that we put a property out there only 2-3 weeks ago. We put one property out in Manchester, and we had, I can't remember exactly what it is now, but at the time it's 150, 160 responses for people to actually go and rent that particular property. So we know that the properties that we're putting on the market to rent, they're getting a huge influx. So nationally, as I say, we're looking at 3.5% reduction over the next 6 months, but we do expect a swift recovery, because my opinion is that a lot of people are going to sort of dip out of the commercial property market, because I feel that commercial property market will struggle. The reason being is because a lot of companies who have realized that the majority of their workers can work from home quite well and quite efficiently will think, well, actually, why am I paying for you know, £100,000 and £150,000 a month office in London, when actually I could halve that and suddenly I've got £1 million saving a year. So I think commercial property is going to struggle, and you'll have commercial property owners look at different areas or different places to invest. I also think people who have got more money in their pockets will again look at different areas to invest. And we've had a lot of influx. The majority of our buyers over the last 6 to 8 weeks have been buyers who have all come from the stock market. When we ask them where their money's coming from for anti-money laundering reasons, where's your money coming from? The majority have said stock market. We cannot risk that kind of money falling 20-30% like it did. Even though it's recovered slightly, they can't be there and risk that kind of thing again. So if you're about to buy, what do you do? If you're about to buy, you need to bid. Now, regardless of the fact that we don't think that there's going to be a major fall off in the city centres, if at all, you need to bid, because you've got an opportunity. So what we're saying to people is, despite all these negative predictions, we've already demonstrated that there's negative predictions year on year, and a lot of them are just absolutely false. They just don't come to fruition. You need to bid. You need to go to a property that you like, find the property that you like first and foremost, and then bid. And tell us what you want to bid, and we'll go and fight your corner for you. Because our role isn't to get you the most. The majority of the time we make flat fees from either selling it to you guys, so we make a flat fee from a client, or a flat fee from a developer. So typically we want to get the price down for you. If we get you a great deal, you'll recommend us and you'll come back to us again. So what we would say to you is, if there's a property on the market, for example, we've got ones now for 250, we're bidding 200. We know we probably won't get 200. But we just go and bid for the chance of that we catch a developer on a good day, or maybe they're having a bad day and they need to get shops and properties, or you know, we suddenly go in with 3 or 4 properties at a time. It looks great money for them, so they take it. But the chances are, even if we get that for 210, 220, we know we've got a great deal. So what I would say to everyone is, bid. Even if the property market fell, if you think that the property market is going to fall 15%, bid 15% lower. It's as simple as that. And if it doesn't fall 15%, which of course we don't think it will, well, then you've had a great result. And the majority of time we say to people, we had someone come along and say they think it's actually going to fall 30%. So they are bidding 30% lower. So we say to them, if you genuinely think the market is going to fall 30%, if you actually think that's going to happen, sell your own property. Sell your own property and then go into rental accommodation and then buy it back in 2 years' time. The chances are, if you've got let's say you've got £1 million property, and you think it's going to fall to 700,000, sell it for £1 million. You've got £1 million there, go into rental accommodation, and when the property market comes down, go and buy the same property back for 700,000. Again, the reason why people don't do it is because then they say, well, actually, it might not happen. Well, there's your answer. So what we'd say to people is, if you're holding property now, you stick with it. You keep getting the growth because you're not looking to sell anyway. If you are looking to buy, you go and bid, because this is the time when to squeeze a developer, because the moment that the developers are back up and running, when they're back on site fully, without the social distancing side of things, then that's the moment that the discounts end. So I feel that it's a great time to get the discounts now. But as I say, overall, we think a 3.5% fall nationally, but the city centres, we just genuinely don't feel that there's going to be a fall there, due to the fact that we've got so much demand going on in the city centres for the renting, that we're already seeing an influx from overseas clients as well who want to buy, because the pound is so weak, therefore they're getting a great exchange rate. And everyone around the globe sees the UK housing market as a stable housing market. So therefore, it's one of these things about watch this space. I feel that the next 3 years is going to be a great time for the property market. So over to you guys. Any questions at all in regards to anything you want to say? There should be a speech bubble or a question mark. And are there any questions at all that you'd like to ask? So we've got one here. I can't. That was the first one. Sorry, Anna. You mentioned you can't see the screen. I hope you can see. Hope you guys could see the screen. We've done a recording of this, so we'll obviously get out this recording to you after after this particular webinar. Got a question here. Where do we see the London market going? Yeah, really good question. So the London market had a bit of a renaissance. We saw with the London market dips for 2 years. We still didn't recommend it, even when the Conservatives got back in power. We just felt that it was a bit flimsy, maybe a bit too high priced in certain areas. I personally feel that the London market is still not a great one to go into. You get certain types of buyers. So anything up to about £1 million in London, people are still getting mortgages. But typically, I'm not saying everyone, but typically, as soon as you start to head to the 1.5, the 2 million, you're talking about a different level of buyer. You're talking about a cash buyer, and actually, this pandemic isn't going to affect that type of market whatsoever. Where we feel the London market will be affected is by the actual initial first-time buyer route. If first-time buyers are struggling, and they're going to struggle more in cities that are expensive. So let's take London, for example. First-time buyers are struggling. That has a knock-on effect all the way up to around about the 700 to £1 million property mark. So if you've got someone there who thinks, you know what, I'm going to rent a little bit longer because I just feel maybe the property market in London may dip, or I just don't feel that secure about the money that I'm getting, or it's going to be a bit tight, the mortgage, whatever it may be, then they rent a little bit longer. They don't buy that first-time buyers. So therefore, your people that are in the first-time buyers already, they can't move up, and so the process goes on. So if I'm honest, I feel that London will be pretty stagnant. I feel that we're going to see probably more of a dip in London, as people tend to stay away at the moment. I feel that what may balance that up is as people are selling off the commercial property, because we've already seen a big dip in commercial property rental prices. Therefore, we know that either people that are holding commercial property just want someone to fill it, but we also know that there's a lot of commercial property landlords out there who are just thinking of getting out of the market totally. They may prop up London and dip into the London market, but overall, I feel that London's still not the time to go, unless, again, if we're getting some deals in London for, I would be in London minimum, I'd be looking at 15% below. There's no way I'd buy London for market price, what it is at the moment. If we've got London, I'd be looking at 15% below at a minimum. But again, London's a capital, it will recover. But as I say, I would still be making sure you bid 15% below. What about SA market if I wish to buy for doing SA? I don't know what you mean by that. Sorry, is that do you mean the South African market? If you could write another question, say what you mean about the SA market, that'd be great. You mentioned longer term view of the market. How do you define longer term in years? Okay, so in terms of my prediction, in terms of the bounce back, I see the market bouncing back extremely quick. And by that, unless, and I will, this is a caveat, and I will come back to that in a minute. So my initial thoughts are, because obviously the in terms of the actual main policies that we say, and the three main instances, which are taxation, legislation, mortgage rates, as long as those three main fundamentals are there, I see that the market bouncing back within 6 to 9 months minimum, and we're back to normal. In terms of if you're going to hold it longer term, if that's what you meant, if the question was in relation to my statement, when you hold properties longer term, I always say that medium term in property market is between the period. So short term property market for me is anything less than 2 years. Now a lot of people in the stock market, that might be a longer term, but in the property market, anything less than 2 years is short term. Then we've got medium term, I would say sort of anything up to your 6 year period. Longer term is sort of that, and then 10 years and plus. So typically, I've held the majority of my properties for over a decade. Very rarely do I sell them just because I'm not in the selling market. Maybe coming up to retirement years, you start to scale back. But in terms of when I say to people hold property, I would be looking at 5 to 10 years at a minimum. That's when you see the most amount of growth and income. And I do say that if you hold the property 10 years, the chances are you'll experience a dip at some point. Or some form of static market. But as I say, typically people go through that. If people have got other ideas where they say, no, I need to be out of this in 2 years, or I need to be out of this in 3 years, then just let us know, because that might change what we recommend. But the majority of ones that we've recommended at the moment will stand that short term, that less than 2 years, because we're getting that much below market value. SA market, serviced accommodation. Okay, apologies. Sorry, I thought you meant the South African market. So where do I see the serviced accommodation market going? Good question. So serviced accommodation has obviously taken probably the biggest hit overall, because people can't get out, they can't get anywhere. So therefore, people's occupancy rates in serviced accommodation would have been pretty much zero. But I do see that once lockdown is lifted, it's going to be let off the leash. I feel that there's going to be a lot of pent up people want to go on holiday. I feel there's going to be a lot of pent up events. So a number of events, whether that be music concerts, whether that be boxing events, sporting events, whatever it may be, I feel they're going to try and cram as much in to a short space of time as possible to play catch up. So I actually see serviced accommodation recovering extremely well. Would I buy serviced accommodation now? Again, I think that was the next question. You got, should I buy serviced accommodation now? I would basically mitigate that. I would have a look at properties that have got both factors, whether you can have serviced accommodation and also buy to let. So as long as you've got the both options, you're laughing, because we've got properties that we advise service accommodation, and again, it's not a great time now. So what we've done is we put clients in there for 6 months, for example. So clients have happily rented a furnished property for 6 months on what would be called an AST, but as I say, they're happy to sign it for 6 months, and then we'll flip over to the serviced accommodation after. If serviced accommodation still isn't ready, we'll do another 6 months. So what I would say is, to buy something that's solely serviced accommodation and cannot be let for anything else, I wouldn't have done that in the first place. I ideally want something with a lease that allows me to do both short-term lets and long-term lets, just in case there's any obstacles. Again, don't get me wrong, this is not something that we predicted at all, but just in case we get anything like this down the line. What signs should we expect to see when London is starting to rebound? What kind of time frame as we expect, as I own a 260k pre-COVID zone 2 flat? Okay, so yeah, good question. Okay, so if we have, and I think I mentioned the caveat before, if we have a second wave of this, then that obviously changes things. If we suddenly see a big spike, and I only see that potentially happening maybe sort of like August, September time, once people sort of get back out and they kind of forget, people quickly forget what lockdown was like, and they get back out and they're on the summer holidays, and we suddenly see a second spike, then of course things are going to take longer to recover. But in terms of when we should start to see it rebound, again, I think that's all. A lot of things typically aren't to do with money in pocket; it's to do with confidence. So I think it's pretty much in terms of that level. If you've got a 260,000 flat in London and you're looking to potentially sell that, or you're just simply waiting for it to go up, that's kind of potentially like your first time buyer route. And I would say it's all to do with confidence. Once people get the confidence back that actually everything's going to be all right, job's going to be okay, no chance of being sort of laid off and things like that, I think that's when we'll see that market, that price bracket market come back in London. So as I say, I think we're in for a big 3 months in terms of what's going to happen in London, because, for example, as I say, the second wave changes things, but if we don't have the second wave, I see that confidence will return during September, October time. Then we start to see people sort of get their foot back on the ladder. But in terms of London as a whole, because obviously then that has a knock-on effect up the scale, I see about 18 months for a return in London. But again, if you can get the discounts now, great. But I see about 18 months before we probably start to feel that the green shoots are coming through in London again. What about Brexit? Well, personally, I just think that there's going to be a bit of a thin deal for Brexit. I don't think we're getting very far. I think there are too many barriers. Both sides want the best, which is for their own team, so to speak, which is understandable. So I pretty much think by the end of the year we'll have some form. I think it's going to benefit both sides. I think it's sort of handbags at the moment at 10 places. I think that the reality is that we come to the end of the year. It's in both sides' interests not to go on WTO terms. So I think that there will be some form of deal done. I don't feel that the Brexit's going to impact us anymore. I think people have kind of forgot about Brexit and they've moved on to the next issue, which is the COVID. So I say I don't see that there being a big fallout for the property market in terms of Brexit. What's happening in the Sheffield area? Well, Sheffield is a really dense area, and it's really dense for student accommodation. So we've got a couple of student accommodations that have been really innovative, because obviously a lot of students have gone home. The Sheffield is really heavily populated with a lot of Asian students who have flown home. So we've got a couple of developers, and they've been really innovative, and they've actually rented to NHS staff with their particular with their property. So they've said, look, you know, NHS staff, because a lot of NHS staff were coming into areas but couldn't find places to live. So Sheffield has been pretty solid. Again, it depends what you own in Sheffield. It depends what your market is and what your demographic is. I would say those who have got an HMO at the moment, specifically for student accommodation, probably are struggling. But for those who have got the your typical PBSA student accommodation, as long as you've got a good management company in there who have tried to be pretty innovative and let it out to your sort of like NHS staff or other short-term tenants, I think you're absolutely fine. But without knowing exactly what you've got, I wouldn't say. But again, Sheffield is one that I would see just kept ticking over nicely. Again, if you've got something good in the city centre, anything Sheffield, Liverpool, Leeds, Manchester, all of those, I just feel extremely strongly about. Of course, we sell in those areas, but a lot of people say, well, you know, we had one client say, well, you would say Manchester's good because you sell there. Well, no, we didn't start selling there and then we say it's good. We said it's good and then we started to sell there. It's like what comes first, the chicken or the egg? We used to sell in London, but as we don't feel it's a solid market for the long term at the moment, we don't sell in London now. So that's why we decided to go to Manchester. We don't get a product in and then we decide to say the city's good. We say the city's good and then we go and find the product. So as I say, at the moment, I feel that they are still our four main cities to go in, and I feel that you're going to have say good times in the city centres. And this is what we've always said: people that have gone cheaper on the outskirts, I think that's where they're going to struggle. I want to buy to let in London, but agents refuse to discount properties. How can I find a good opportunity? Again, if they it's their prerogative. If they don't want a discount, they don't want a discount, and I think that's probably testament to what they believe that London's going to do. But again, I wouldn't be buying without a discount. If you cannot force someone to offer a discount. If you're buying from a seller or you're buying from a developer and they won't give a discount, well, they obviously don't need to sell it. But again, the way that you find a good opportunity is you put your name down, and you might wait a year before you get something that's heavily discounted. At the moment, even ourselves, our ears really on the ground. We don't have any discounted properties in London because people are still pretty confident the way that the market is going to go generally. But I do feel that if you're going to be buying in London, because don't forget, if you buy in London, you're paying more money. If you pay more money for the price of the property, you're going to be paying more stamp duty. If you pay more stamp duty, which is essentially money you're giving away to the government, it takes you longer to recover what you've actually laid out. So if you're giving away sort of 10, 15, or even £20,000 stamp duty, and you're only getting £10,000 a year renting, well, you've actually only broke even after your second year, and only after your second year do you start to make a profit. So we've got to work those factors in. But again, it depends what you're looking for in London. A lot of people come through to us and say, I want to buy in London. Okay, where? Well, anywhere, and they just don't have a clue where they're looking in London. So I would say you want to narrow your search down to a specific area in London, within probably one or two tube stops, and then speak to local agents in that area if you're looking to buy something that's either a distressed property, because typically they will have their own lists of builders or friends, family who they go to first of all, so I'd get to know them. But again, what we would typically look at in London are discounts on where developers are hurting. So if developers have done a development of, let's say, around figures 100 units, and they've got 5 left, and they just want out. They don't want anyone on the ground there. They just want out. And typically, we tend to find that the last 5 in those particular areas in London will sell nicely discounted. So that's what we're looking for. What about rent? Is that going to be dropped on accommodation? Rent affects mortgage payments in some cases. Well, again, if my advice to anyone that's renting is just don't drop your rent. Again, I feel that the outskirts will have to drop their rent because I feel that people on the outskirts will lose tenants. I think if you've got a property on the outskirts, you've got a 2 or 3 bed terraced house on the outskirts, and it's a flat share with again a lower paid individual, then again they may go back home because they can't afford to live there. So I think that particular type of buy-to-let is probably not the best buy-to-let to have, but we've always maintained don't buy on the outskirts. But if you're city centre, we just know from doing our own advertisement on Rightmove for the properties that we have a huge influx, and the rental market is more in demand now than it was before COVID. That's a fact. There's more people looking to rent a property now than there was before COVID. So again, if you've got the right property, you're not going to need to drop your rent. What are your thoughts of the property market if we have a second flu wave? Okay, a second COVID wave, I'm guessing you meant there. But yeah, again, I think if we have a second wave and it's a big wave and we go on lockdown again, well, we're back to square one. We're back to the case of where people can't go and sell their property because they can't have valuations, they can't have viewings, and so the process goes on. But I don't think it impacts in terms of property prices per se. But what I am concerned about is if we do have a second wave and how that affects the economy. Because at the moment, I don't think the economy is going to be as badly affected as what people are saying. We've been extremely busy. The majority of people I spoke to have been extremely busy. In terms of the property market, we speak to construction companies, we speak to material providers, and they're all saying they cannot keep up with the amount of demand. It's something that you always ask. You speak to friends and family, oh, how you been? You've been busy? And everyone is saying how busy they are. But that's because everything's being propped up by the government. You're talking about people have been furloughed and they're still being paid 100% of their wages, but not doing any work. However, if you turn around and we have a second wave of it, and the government decide, well, actually, we can't keep propping things up, then I think it's going to be a different story. But we obviously have to, hope that doesn't happen. But in terms of the predictions, I think we're basing predictions on predictions, and I think that's where it could get a little bit messy. We're basing the prediction of the property market on a prediction if we have a second wave. I think that's probably impossible to say. But again, let's be realistic. If we have a second wave, it's not going to be ideal. So we just hope that people be sensible and we don't have a second wave, and the property market, in my opinion, will just tick over nicely. Because it'd be interesting to know, out of all of you guys there, think in your head, do you have more money at the end of every month now or less money at the end of every month? The majority of people that I spoke to actually have more. So it's always quite interesting to know. But anyway, guys, I think that's all the questions that you guys have had. Thanks for joining us, guys. We will be publishing this on our website within the next couple of hours or so. And we've actually got some new things coming up. We've got a meet with the expert. So every month we're going to have a regular webinar, but also we're going to add to that every month we're going to have a regular meet with the expert. So the next one's going to be a mortgage broker. We're then going to be talking with an accountant about company setup. We're then going to be talking about foreign exchange brokers. So every month now we're going to have a meet with the expert. So keep your eye out for that, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.